In August of 1989, David Morton Lindley, a World War II veteran and father of 6 children, was diagnosed with inoperable lung cancer. When David was diagnosed, he and his wife Marguerite chose hospice care for the last year of his life and distinctly walked toward the fate he could no longer change. Both David and Marguerite had lost their fathers as teenagers. David clearly remembered watching his own father die of skin cancer and watching the flesh fall from his father's face in the agony of the last days. Marguerite was also 16 when her father died in the hospital, and she was unable to be with him. Neither David nor Marguerite wanted this for themselves or for their children. As his health deteriorated, David moved to a hospice unit in Plantation, Florida for the last 5 days of his life, where his wife and 6 children were able to be with him around the clock. On September 29, 1990, as his wife of 33 years held his hand, he passed away. 21 years later, in 2011, Marguerite would pass away in that same hospice, surrounded by the same 6 adult children. Their children were forever changed by both experiences. They realized that death was no more than a gateway to a place they could not understand. And their children were grateful and humbled that both of their parents had received such excellent health care, including all the opportunities to talk, to respond, to care. And they had the opportunity to meet death on their own terms. All their children felt that hospice had given them the gift of compassion and caring, but most of all the gift of time, precious time to say goodbye. In one of his most well-known works, Dylan Thomas advises us, "Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at the close of day, rage and rage and rage against the dying of the light." But this very sentiment is impossible. No matter how hard we humans fight, death will come. Most humans fear death because what lies beyond is unknown, and many fear how their own death will come about. For some it will come quickly and unsuspecting. For others it may be a drawn-out process. Any individual dealing with declining health has a choice as to how to spend their last days. The process of health and caring for the greater good are at the core of the healthcare communication ethics, and they work hand in hand with the hospice and the palliative care movement. This paper will argue that there was a serious unethical healthcare communication standard in the United States. In the 1960s, it was identified, explained, and disentangled by 2 physicians, which resulted in the development of hospice care as we know it today. Healthcare communication ethics and the hospice and palliative care movement came into being because of the unethical way that terminal patients were often treated prior to this time period. Communication was difficult for physicians because most were reluctant to deliver news of an incurable illness for reasons such as the reaction of the patient giving up, or the physicians themselves not wanting to give up. Another ethical violation in the delivery of care was that physicians were often reluctant to increase pain and opiate medication for fear that their dying patients would become addicts, therefore causing enormous and unnecessary suffering to the patient. The medical profession also saw death as a defeat and did not openly discuss the matter with their patients. Before certain physicians began studying the treatment of terminally ill patients, the prevailing ethic was that patients should be cured. Those who could not be cured were a sign of failure, and it was acceptable and even desirable to lie to them about their prognosis. The philosophy of the hospice movement is to encourage terminally ill patients to choose how they wish to live out their final days and how they wish to die. Indeed, healthcare communication ethics at its best finds a way to respond to what Frankl called the final freedom, the stand we take towards a fate we can no longer change. I am a witness to the strength and implementation of these moral beliefs in which communication, health, responsiveness, and a great deal of care create that bridge between life and death and make the journey a hopeful one for both patient and family. I know this because Marguerite and David Lindley were my parents. The roots of the hospice movement are widely credited to Dr. Cicely Saunders. Cicely Saunders was born in England and originally went to Oxford to study economics. But when World War II began, she wanted to do something more practical and took up nursing and social work. In 1948, she would meet the man who would alter the course of her life and begin her lifelong study in the care of dying, David Tasma. If we apply modern healthcare communication theory, patients were not receiving the communication, the responsiveness, and the healthcare that they needed. Dr. Saunders set out to change this in England first. She was quoted in one of her letters stating, "I make no apology for identifying as a correct starting point the methodology of simple listening, recording, and analyzing." As Wall wrote in 1997, palliative care has succeeded in the face of two common myths, which were shared by patients and doctors, of drug dependence and tolerance, swept aside by precise and convincing observation. Finally, words such as care, compassion, empathy, responsiveness, fear, and hope began to enter medical conversation. David Tasma was a Polish-Jewish man aged 40 years. He had escaped from the Warsaw Ghetto and had come to London where he worked as a waiter. His family had all perished in the Holocaust, so he had no relatives and very few friends in London. He had developed cancer from which he was dying, and he was in severe physical pain which was badly controlled. He was desperately lonely, and Cicely Saunders was his only visitor. He was also dying of an unfulfilled life. As the two of them talked, there came to them both a vision of a better way to care for those at the end of life. When David died in February 1948, Cicely found he had left her 500 pounds with the words, "I will be a window into your home." The second main contributor to the hospice and palliative care movement was Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. In her 1969 groundbreaking work on death and dying, Dr. Ross further brought this healthcare communication ethic into the open as a topic of discussion into the United States society. She brought the fact that dying people and their families were not often given the chance to participate or choose in the manner of their death. And Dr. Ross argued that patients should have a choice and the ability to participate in the decisions that affect their own destiny. Dr. Saunders and Dr. Ross identified and understood these ethical issues. According to Arnett, the goal of healthcare communication ethics is to protect and promote a sense of gratitude and knowledge of a final freedom, our response to health, its absence, and the eventuality of death. Both these women took a damaged and broken system of communication and found a way to make it whole. Dr. Ross specifically directed the public's attention to the central ethical healthcare question. The more we're making advancements in science, the more we seem to fear and deny the reality of death. How is this possible? The denial of death itself and the emotional impact it has on both patient and loved ones is an infringement of healthcare ethics. Through the prism of healthcare communication ethical standards, I've experienced and observed firsthand how hospice has taken each facet of these practices, healthcare communication, health, responsiveness, and care, and thoroughly implemented them into their organization in order to create the environment for the greater good. Through this organization, we were given the highest of all ethical standards along with excellent medical care and communications about my parents' condition. The main goal for everyone was the fact that both my parents have a good death. And yet the discussion and study of healthcare communication ethics did not begin until the 1980s. Most studies that predate the 1980s do not use the same terminology and classifications as Arnett. But nevertheless, if we use Arnett's language to describe studies, we see a remarkable alignment because ethics of healthcare theory is based on seeing the world comprised of relationships rather than of people standing alone. Care can mean protection. Reddit calls caring protection holding and focuses on creating networks of concern and commitment. Furthermore, adhering to the ethic of care can mean finding ways to allow patients and others to share their inner thoughts and feelings, helping them find their voice. Indeed, it is by helping the patient and their loved ones find their voice and participate in living their last days to the fullest that is an illustration of successful communication ethics and the goal of to what is to meet before us. According to Hart, a good death combines all facets of healthcare communication ethics. Communication, health, responsiveness, and care. The good death located within the social life of the dying person was characterized by the following 5 features: the awareness of dying, adjustments to and preparations for death, relinquishing of roles, responsibilities and duties, and the making of farewells with others. Hospice gave my siblings and I each one of these precious gifts. When I first began to research this project, I think what I was most struck by was how connected we all are in, forgive the term, from the circle of life, and how a man who died in 1948 and a woman who he was friends with were able to make such a change in the healthcare world and in such a short period of time, make that change for the greater good and for any of the people who are dying. And they actually affected my life, and they affected the communication ethics in my life, as far as my parents, who both had a very good death. And that was what everyone set out to do, and everyone set out to change. And I think that this was an excellent, hospice itself is an excellent example of that healthcare problem that's been solved. So I had to use my own data, my own experience for my analysis, and this was a tough project for me. It was tough to do. So this last piece, I'm not going to speak. I'm going to let Van Morrison go ahead and do the talking for me. Thank you.
We were born before the wind, also younger than the sun. Yeah, the bonnie boat was one as we sail into the mystic. I can now hear the sailors cry, smell the sea and feel the sky. Let your soul and spirit fly into the mystic. And where that foghorn blows, I will be coming home. Yeah, when the foghorn blows, I wanna hear it. I don't have to fear it, and I wanna rock your gypsy soul, just like way back in the days of old. And magnificently we will fold into the mystic. When that foghorn blows, you know I will be coming